Thanks for joining today, Adam. We're going to run through a number of things today, but the main focus for us is what are some of the challenges that customers have faced today in that marketplace? Where are these price increases coming from? Where are some of the challenges we're seeing in terms of supply chain? How do customers adapt to what is now changing times, life cycles, sales cycles for customers to understand where their projects sit?
Yeah, Dan, thank you for having me. The challenges I would say that that we are seeing customers having are, well, first and foremost, digital transformation, right? So we always talk at HPE about being hybrid by design rather than hybrid by accident. So I suppose it's that constant balance of getting the right workload in the right location at the right cost profile, whether that's on-prem, in the cloud, but making sure you've got the right balance. You've got the security imperative, so ensuring that you've got the right security postures, that you're meeting compliance and regulatory challenges as well. That is a landscape that is forever evolving, as you well know. And then I think one of the big things we're seeing is sort of AI preparedness. So, if you think about not just having the skills and the right sort of capabilities, but the right infrastructure, power and cooling requirements, having the right sort of high density racks. These challenges are so numerous for customers. And then I guess on top of all of that, if I summarize those three as the sort of objectives, you've got further challenges which have precipitated in the last couple of years and also in the last couple of months. First and foremost around virtualization and the sort of changes in the landscape around cost, licensing models. That has been a big challenge for customers, one that I think they're quite keen to sort of understand options, alternatives, but more sort of recently, and this is what will be the subject of today's conversation, it's really around what we're seeing in the memory market. So DRAM and NAND from a memory perspective, and SSD, where we are seeing significant cost increases, significant demand, and as a result, supply challenges as well. So those are things that customers are really trying to tackle, and I guess that's why at a time like this they need partnership, they need thorough commitment from both partner, vendor on transparency and just being really direct. I think this is a time where we are really tested to bring some thought leadership and creativity to the situation.
Absolutely, and hence doing things like this, right? Hence having conversations.
Get on the front foot and let's talk about it openly, right?
Absolutely. So I think what we're also seeing from our side is that change of priority. So everything you said there in terms of what customers are having to understand as part of their general business as usual versus any innovation they're trying to incorporate is the change in priority now, because they may have got to a certain decision-making process with around deployments and, as I said, innovation. But now, because of the challenges in the market, they're having to now, right, what is my most prioritized workload? What is my most prioritized change? Where does my strategy need to lead from here? And as you said, I suppose us as a partnership is then where we step in and go, right, where we're seeing other organizations, other verticals, other technologies really support these changes and prioritizations. This is where we want to provide guidance to you to make that next step. You're not on your own. You have support around you in the virtual teams. So.
Absolutely. And I guess, to sort of tackle specifically the memory costs that we're seeing, because I would say a couple of months ago the question was being asked of us regularly, when will we see this pass, when will we see things start to calm down, and all of this, to be specific, is probably quite reminiscent of COVID. And of course during COVID there'll be plenty of customers and partners that still have the scars from those elongated lead times, and there was a lot of challenging conversations we had to have during that period. But of course that was a semiconductor challenge as people transitioned to home working, and that's why it impacted everything from your mobile phone to your car to a server. But semiconductors make up approximately 5% of a server build componentarily, and currently memory, where we are seeing the increases in prices, is around 60 to 70% on the most recent generation servers. So that is where the challenge comes from. And of course, because of the unprecedented AI scale build-outs from large language models, sovereign governments, neo-cloud service providers, parts of the financial services industry, buying on an unprecedented scale, we've got this sort of gold rush around GPU and then adjacent CPU as well, which has put such pressure on the industry in terms of supply and demand. And And I saw a comment from Michael Dell a couple of weeks ago saying that he expects demand to be 625x by 2028. So our belief now is that this is not a moment in time or a cycle necessarily, but it's a market reset. And I think customers and the way that we operate are going to have to get used to a different landscape and as a result operate in a different way. So as a business, we've had to introduce new measures, shorter quote validity, more flexibility post-order as well. So, we're trying to respond to it so that we can give customers, again, optionality. But I think this requires an industry-wide level set, I would say.
Yeah, and it's a good point that we're seeing in terms of feedback when we're having these sorts of conversations, which is, do we have to wait out that cost cycle of where we're seeing unprecedented costs now, or is that likely to plateau? And I think it's the latter. I think we're now going to see that new normal of where that cost is going to sit for these sorts of components. But also, as you said, or as I touched on earlier, is that prioritization is we're going to have to start bringing more and more of these conversations, more of these projects forward, because if the timescale was to refresh by next year, you can't wait until January and sit on a 12 to 14 day lead time like we were used to before. We're having to bring those forward because if that demand is going to continue to spike until 2028, that's not going to slow down. We're not going to be able to get kit into data centers as quickly as we used to. So we have to really bring these conversations forward and also start to reset what those budgetary boundaries are going to be, because like we said, it's only going to go one way at the moment, and that's what we're trying to get ahead of that conversation.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
Yeah, and what, I suppose, can we touch on some of those lead times that we're seeing to the moment, just set the expectation of, as I said a second ago, 12 to 14 days is what we were used to on compute and storage builds. And, what are we seeing in the market, or what are you guys seeing in the market today?
Well, I suppose the reality is that, there are individual customers that would happily take up our memory supply for the entirety of a year. What our view is, of course, we have a responsibility to the customers that have worked with us for a number of years, and our partner ecosystem as well, to make sure that we have a balanced approach. The reality is that there are a number of SKUs and particular builds that are on now severe lead times, which means that from our perspective, we don't know exactly when we will be able to fulfill those orders. And I would say of the orders that we've taken so far this year, there is, in some instances, no guarantees that we will be able to fulfill them by the end of 2026. Now, and that's not every instance. We are fairly robust in terms of our supply chain and the guarantees that we've been given around particularly memory supply. And I would say what this requires is a collaborative conversation between customer, partner and vendor to steer to the right available SKUs as well. So, there's a number of things we can do around looking at workload balancing and making sure that we provide something that, a technology that is sufficient. It might not be necessarily what had been planned or accounted for when customers were going out to market. So I think just flexibility is what's required, really, so that we can make sure that we are tackling the most pressing refresh or projects that customers need to be fulfilled. And we are sort of operating with a little bit more flexibility than perhaps we might have done six months ago.
And let's not forget, this is an industry-wide challenge, right? This isn't just a Bytes and HPE conversation. Although we're here having this, this is every technology vendor, every customer, every vertical that this is impacting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say that's what we're seeing from a partner level as well, is that conversation now more than ever around right-sizing and optimizing, as opposed to buying what feels nice at the time, in terms of that's the solution we want and need. And actually, if we right-size and optimize the environment first, it then tells us what we need for growth, so we can be a bit more flexible on those component builds. So do we have the right processor? Could we tweak that slightly, something we can get within a shorter period of time? From a memory capacity perspective, do we need to populate all of those slots? Could we go for larger RAM SKUs to half populate that to allow growth in the future, but also fulfill now? So I would say, from our perspective, we're seeing that more, as you said, more than ever. But also, I guess, where we help customers, a bit of a unique identifier to Bytes, which is take that step back, have a look at the whole landscape, not just the single project that's in front of us, and right size for the customer moving forwards. And I think we've seen that from a partnership with HPE especially. Yeah,
I mean, we are continually banging the drum about, don't think about refresh, think about modernisation. So take a beat, what we're seeing is if you go and refresh a server today, and get into let's find the cheapest possible cost for that server, you're still going to be paying more than you probably anticipated. So it's a great opportunity. You've got to act now. And to your point, it's about consultation, it's about assessment, it's about understanding where you can optimize, where you can make cost savings. The cheapest DRAM available to you is that which is in your environment that is not being utilized today. So we have some amazing tools around assessment. I mean, I'm biased because I work for HPE, of course, but Cloud Physics is an incredible tool that it's like an MOT for a virtualized environment. And what we can give is really data-driven outputs that can give customers some really straightforward, immediate cost-saving opportunities. And that is inevitably for us the best way of starting an engagement, because it starts with consultation and it starts with a conversation. And I think that is what we're encouraging customers to take a look at is think about refresh more holistically. How can we modernize? How can we use this as an inflection point about how we operate and try and employ that hybrid by design model?
Yeah, and I guess we probably wouldn't get through a conversation without mentioning things like AI. I don't know, you touched on it at the start, but are you seeing that a lot of customers are having to utilize this time especially to find that platform that's going to allow them to incorporate AI workloads moving forwards, and again probably relook at, rather than just looking at the business as usual, which you said, modernising and refreshing, but actually modernising, but also allowing a platform that allows us to build for the future, not having it as two separate conversations? Are you seeing that a lot more?
Yeah, so observation from the conversations we're having with enterprises around AI is that customers have got siloed data, some on-premise, some in co-location, some in the cloud, and having that sort of unified governance is the big challenge. So for us, automation is the name of the game there, and we've got some amazing software tools that can help with those conversations. And I think, again, it's sort of part of that broader overarching thought process is that how do we take a step back? How do we sort of make sure that we are future-proof, that we've got the right cost locations, the right sort of cost profiles, but that we're preparing ourselves for the future? AI is as good as the data that goes into it. So you need to make sure that you are data ready. And that, again, is one of the big challenges for customers when it comes to getting themselves, thinking about what are the right efficiencies, what are the right POCs that we're going to run with AI in mind. But again, that is a conversation that we, and I know Bytes are happy to help with.
Yeah, and I think that's just, again, to reiterate, it's not just an AI cause that is changing the pricing structures and the supply chain structures that we're seeing today. It's everything. It's all encompassing, and as we said, AI is only going to grow, which means more of that resource, more of that focus is going to be split across two different environment conversations.
Well, if you think logistically about those data centers, of course you've got these GPU servers or AI factories, but they require cables. And therefore the price of cables increases because the demand on cables is increasing. So we're seeing an increase in the price of peripherals, and there's no memory necessarily involved there, but it's a sort of rising tide raises all ships to an extent. So this is why the sort of adjacent CPU has sort of become collateral damage as well. And I think that we see that challenge on a broad scale, whether it be software, whether it be customers that are highly embedded in the public cloud. Those increases in cost are going to be passed down the line. So I think every customer, regardless of industry, regardless of vertical, is going to have a different thought process as they approach the next couple of years. This is a market reset rather than a cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned around flexibility, are we seeing more of a demand now for those on-demand consumption, flexible as a service models? Budgets are having to be reevaluated. Budgets are having to be looked at in terms of how that spend works. Are we seeing that more and lean into more of those GreenLake-led conversations where we can support customers with that flexibility, that stretch on what their environment looks like today? So when they are caught with a spike in workload demand, a project that needs to happen over here, innovation they want to spin into a lab without going through a whole process. We see more of a demand for those elastic style commercial structures, but also as a service models.
Yes, in short. I think there's probably two answers to this question, but in terms of GreenLake, absolutely. We are having more of those conversations because what we can do, for example, is we can and for those that don't know, GreenLake is a model that gives you not only a unified platform for your sort of hybrid infrastructure, but it also allows you to deploy more infrastructure but pay for what you use and therefore grow into it. So for example, historically we would typically deploy about 80% on day one. We can now look at a model where we deploy 60% and give customers more of an opportunity to grow into that environment and just protect themselves sort of inflationary wise. So absolutely that is something we are seeing more and more customers looking at as an alternative, and it just gives them that flexibility. But secondly, HPE Financial Services is a massive play for us right now. So we have a plethora of offers that can help customers retain cash flow, make sure that they are operating, in a prudent fashion, but also sort of they want to partner with us, with our sales teams, with our partners early in engagement so that they can look at projects creatively and try and solution for a customer based on what their circumstances are. So we're seeing our financial services team being brought into engagements earlier in the piece. They've got a number of offers which I'll refrain from running through today, but extended deployment, 0% finance or software, there's a number of levers that we can pull to be flexible. So whether that is an as a service model, whether that's looking at fair market value leasing, whether we can work with partners around other alternatives. The name of the game is flexibility, and this is what we want to communicate, is that this is a challenge, but we recognise it. We want to act with transparency, empathy, but also proactivity, and try and get on the front foot to help customers.
Yeah, and I think that's where we're seeing that conversation come to fruition a little bit more now, because it does allow you to have a bit more of a structured, budgeted approach. In that cloud-like pay for as you grow, pay as you use sort of model, as opposed to large, big capex upfront purchases, which you're not sure now. As I said, sort of right at the start of the conversation, is we're seeing customers having to look at those projects now where they would have been planning for it in the beginning of 2027, right? So, and that's going to be potentially unbudgeted. How do the team support that change? How do the team support those deployments, those migrations, especially with everything happening in the market today? So, those models which you've mentioned and run through just allows customers to have it a bit more palatable to the bottom line, but also allow them to go and deploy these changes, these modernizations, without being held back by their own internal processes or their own internal requirements. They can spread that cost, that pain, and that's where I guess we as partners come in as well, right? Is those additional resources, those services to help organizations today. But now that we can do it from a commercial stance as well, and as you said, sort of a bit more of a structured burst, a bit more of a structured elasticity, flexibility, that whole support is there. And I think, as we've mentioned a couple of times, is we're here to help and we're here to structure, and we're now having to be forced almost to be creative, which I think lends in both a Bytes and a HPE world, right?
Absolutely, because this is the time that when in challenging times, this is when relationships are forged, and as a vendor, as a technology provider, we've got the opportunity to make a difference for customers and to bring them creativity. Ultimately, the budget that they've got today is not going to cover the challenges they're seeing on infrastructure cost increases, likely on virtualization cost increases, with all the demands that we talked about at the top of the podcast. So this is the time where we can build meaningful, long-lasting partnerships where we can make a difference. And I think that it's a great time for us to prove our worth. And I think we've got the options and the capability to do that, but we've got to do it together, right? We do this in partnership.
Absolutely. We don't want to talk about customer use cases because I think every customer is unique, but I think from the two organisations between ourselves is we've got enough engagement with customers where we can use the great ideas from each bespoke engagement and requirement to use that experience within any customer we talk to, right? Is in terms of, right, well, we know that we can swap these components out and this is coming a lot quicker. We know that these are the sorts of timescales you're working to before pricing expires.
Yeah.
We can use that for every customer's benefit across the entire, the vertical, our customer base, as opposed to before where it was probably very customer engagement and project led. It's now strategy led across our entire customer base rather than being very siloed and focused on the conversation you're having on day one, right? So, no, I think that's been really good to sort of run through. I guess from a follow-up actions perspective, what we're trying to get out of this is hopefully we've covered all the points in terms of, this isn't just a flash in the pan thing. We do expect this to be going on for quite a long period of time. resources are there to support. We've got lots of different avenues that people can go down, but that follow-up action, I guess, from my perspective, and you can kind of cover yours in a second, but it's engage with the resources you have at hand, engage with your account managers at Bytes, your specialists at Bytes. Ask the question, if we were thinking about doing this in 2, 3, 4 months' time, a year's time, what does that look like from a timescales perspective? What impacts am I going to have to not only my business, but also from a budget perspective? What do I need to build in for the next 2, 3 years, and allow us to utilise our experience and support to support you as an organisation, right? But from a HPE perspective, is there anything else that?
Yeah, Dan, I totally agree. There are a number of things that we can help with in this environment, whether it be assessments of existing environment, we can introduce you to financial services representatives, we can give you some practical advice around workload optimization, and you mentioned some of the different sort of options you've got in terms of how you build out your projects and your plans for the next couple of years. It starts with a conversation, and it can be as straightforward as just understanding your existing environment, right? And understanding what's utilised, what's not. But you can't do nothing, because what I can assure you is the price that we see today will be significantly higher in 2 months. It will be significantly higher than that 2 months down the line. It will be significantly higher than that next year. So I think now is the time to act. I'm not saying now is the time to necessarily run and buy something. Don't panic. But now is the time to act, and act with a partner like Bytes. We would love to help at HPE. We can give you some really practical advice on the right things to do, or the right moves to make, so that you can digitally transform, that you're protected, that you have the right security postures, that you are preparing yourself for AI workloads, and that you're doing that with the right sort of financial wraparound, to make sure that you are economically sustainable. So the time is absolutely right to act at this point.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.